lived experience of OCD since the age of 7. Late at night eating, me, my mum, my brother. And I just started getting these intrusive images on repeat about a tarantula crawling up my dad, about to bite him and kill him. I didn't know what an intrusive thought was. It felt like a premonition.
The OCD Stories podcast was groundbreaking. And guy in England who's suddenly getting a hold of all of these people all over the world, and they're bearing their life story to him.
But I just remember sitting on the edge of my bed, really down, and just remember thinking, right, well, if I'm going to suffer, if my life's going to be rubbish, people might as well get something from it. And then I started thinking of ideas, and that's how it really came about.
Let's say in 25 years from now, what are the highlights going to be, do you think, that they're going to say, here's what Stuart Ralph did?
If they come away just thinking, well, he cared. He saw me, he saw my pain, he cared. That's the most important thing to me, and that's what I try and have with the podcast. And that's what I want to be remembered for.
Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Get to Know OCD podcast. My name is Patrick McGrath. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer for NOCD. Today I'm joined by Stuart Ralph. Hi Stuart.
Yeah, hey, good to
How
see you,
doing?
Patrick. I'm good. It was
Well,
a pleasure. Chat with
usually we're talking in a box, so
Zoom, yeah.
here we're together. This is, you have a body, it's neat.
you. Yeah,
Hi.
it's not a big body, it's pretty
Some
tiny,
tattoos,
but,
even everything. Yeah, so welcome. It's so glad
you.
to have you here.
Yeah.
There's a lot that you've done in the OCD world, and I've had the pleasure to be on your podcast several
many
times. Just briefly, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name's Stuart Ralph. Lived experience of OCD since the age of 7. I'm a counsellor and psychotherapist. I call myself that because that was in my degree title. So I use both those words. Obviously, they're somewhat interchangeable. Work with children and young people, 4 to 25, and I do the OCD Stories podcast, and I live in the UK, or England specifically in the UK. So I have my own personal story of OCD. My earliest memory was when I was 7. Ironically enough, if that's the right word, was here in Orlando.
Really?
Yeah, so it was June 1994, so basically 30 years and a month ago. I was here for a family holiday, vacation, and it was a great holiday, amazing time, incredible memories. The only 2-week period me and my brother didn't fight for. That's what my parents always say. But yeah, I remember getting here, and my dad was ill because I think jet lag or something like that. So he was in the hotel. We were at a Wendy's or a Denny's or some sort of diner, late at night eating, me, my mum, my brother. And I just started getting these intrusive images on repeat about a tarantula crawling up my dad, about to bite him and kill him. And at the time, I now know it's anxiety. However, at the time, I had no concept of what anxiety was.
Sure.
But there was this feeling of impending doom. I fully believed that it was a premonition. I didn't know what an intrusive thought was. It felt like a premonition. And if I didn't do anything, we were going to get back to the hotel. My dad was going to be dead. It would be all my fault. For whatever reason, though, as much as I believed it, I didn't. There was obviously a part of me that didn't, and I didn't tell my mum. And we got back, he wasn't dead. So I had many more intrusive images over the trip, but that was the first one that really sticks out for me. So it's kind of great to be back here 30 years on, and not experiencing intrusive thoughts in that way, or if they come up, I don't care as much.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then I could give you my whole story, but it would take ages, as you know. But as Johnny said, for all the different themes, not all of them, most of them, there was a few I was lucky enough to dodge, although they're all very much the same thing.
The OCD Stories podcast was, as far as I know, the very first podcast about OCD, and was groundbreaking in giving people the opportunity to put a face, or at least a voice, to OCD in the stories. Tell us all about the podcast.
Yeah, so I have to caveat there. I think there were 2 podcasts prior to me.
Okay.
That I actually listened to as part of my recovery, and they really helped me, which was one of the other inspirations for it.
Sure.
They stopped a couple months before I started, or maybe one slightly overlapped, but it was basically they had ended, and then I started. It is a weekly podcast out every Sunday. It's been weekly since about the end of the first month when I started it. And I realized if I didn't do it weekly, I would stop. My brain is very much all or nothing.
Okay.
I'm the hardest working, laziest person I know.
Okay.
I'm extremely lazy in some areas and extremely over the top in others. And with the podcast, I'm over the top in it. And if I didn't do it weekly, I would have quit a long time ago. So that's why it's weekly. I interview people like yourself, Patrick, experts, researchers, anyone with a unique angle, occasionally psychiatrists, but not a great deal of them. Nothing personal towards them. I just don't know many of them. And then after about a year, I got into lived experience, so people with OCD and sharing their stories. And now it's kind of a 50-50. There's people's stories, experts, and it's not one after the other. I kind of mix it based on who I've recorded with. But
sure.
And it's very much, also originally, now I ask questions kind of like I guess you're doing, because you want to learn more, and it's about your clients and being the best you can, and obviously improving NOCD. And that's where I'm at now with my questions. When I started it was very much about my recovery. So it was like, I was getting people like yourself on because I didn't want to pay your hourly rate. And I wanted...
Wait, I'm going to send you a bill.
I wanted to learn from people like you. And and the idea was, if anyone listened, amazing.
Yeah.
But that wasn't my goal. It was like to help me and help anyone that would listen. I didn't expect that many people to listen. And it grew fairly quickly, which really shocked me. So that's kind of where we're at with the podcast. And I try and make it open-minded, very much always covering ERP because I believe in it, I use it, it's helped me. But I also look at those adjunct, those other things as well. And that keeps it fresh for me too.
Awesome. So what do you do now? Tell everyone. You've got a practice, you've got the podcast. What's going on?
Yeah, so the OCD Stories podcast, which was started in December 2015. So I think this is the 9th year maybe, which is mad to think about, but it's just week by week. I just get it done and don't think about it. If I did think about it, I wouldn't do it. And then, I'm a therapist in the UK, primarily with children and young people. So I go from 4 years up to 25. Obviously, the adolescents has gone up to 25 now, based on that study that came out. I love that work. I try and get very creative, bring in, obviously, ERP, ACT, all of that, compassion, but I try and bring in, for the young kids at least, play therapy elements to make it more interactive. And I enjoy trying to merge ERP with that sort of creative approach. It's quite fun. And then, as you said, the centre, the Intrusive Centre for OCD Therapy, which I always struggle to say, but yeah. And we were advised against using that word, but it seems to have worked, so yeah.
What do you find is different treating children and families and adolescents versus adults?
If we include adults, say 18 to 25, because the only other experience I've had with adults is I run an annual camping trip, and that is 18 and above, and there's people up to like in their 60s we've had. So if I just take that 18 to 25, at that point they're very much independent, very adult. Obviously there's still that kind of a lot of social issues. They might be at college, university, whatever it is, trying to navigate all of that. With kids it's just much more creative. Otherwise they get bored, you see them zone out really easy. So I have to get creative. A lot of whiteboard usage, although I do that anyway with 18 to 25-year-olds, or if I'm on Zoom with them, again, the Zoom whiteboard. So I'd say it's really just the play and creative element. I try not to treat kids as kids, basically. I try and treat them as human beings with their own inner world and personalities. That seems to work for me. I like all the age ranges, and I like the variance, because otherwise I might get bored if, say, I was just doing, 8 to 12-year-olds or whatever,
You have an aspect of treating OCD that I don't have with having OCD yourself. How do you incorporate what you've gone through into the work that you've done for kids and families?
Well, firstly, it's worth saying, because people might always think this, I need a therapist with OCD.
Right.
And I think there's something unique and nice to that. I don't think it's important. Like you get OCD incredibly well.
Thank you.
I've spoken to many other therapists that don't have OCD that they get it, you know, and so I just want to put out there in case. So for me, the question was, how do I bring my own kind of journey into it?
Yeah.
I have to be careful not to. Yeah, it's a bit compassion. I have to be careful not to get not triggered in a. I'm picking up on their themes, but I'm not putting my own pain and trauma onto them. I have to make sure my stuff's not getting involved. But generally, it's okay. And I find that at times it does trigger me more in a good way. Like the emotion rises up in me, and then I use that to connect with them, to have more compassion and empathy. It just allows me to connect quickly, I think. So I think that's the main thing. And then I might occasionally do a bit of self-disclosure if I think it's relevant. Working with young kids especially, even teens, the first time I meet them, I know it's scary to meet a therapist, be in this strange room with this strange man. And I don't usually have tattoos on display, I'm usually covered. And I just say to them, look, you know, there's nothing you can tell me, OCD-wise at least, that I probably haven't thought, haven't heard, haven't had myself, haven't spoken to someone who's had it, just to try and destigmatize it, de-shame it, take some of the fear out of it. And that usually seems to help. I have to be careful at sometimes they then want to ask you loads of questions about your story, and I have to kind of, pull back and redirect it to them. But that seems to help, I think.
And we should maybe give a warning to the audience. Large thunderstorm coming in, so if you hear some booms or see a light flicker, that is what it is. There's not anything else OCD related going on or something like that.
That's how powerful my interview is.
What are you bringing in here to? Tell me about the development of the podcast and how here's this guy in England who's suddenly getting a hold of all of these people all over the world, and they're bearing their life story to him, or famous researchers taking time out of their schedule to be like, oh yeah, let's chat about this. What you've done's amazing, and I think it would be a great story for people to hear.
Yeah, thank you. So it was actually the OCD Stories started as when I was 2014, I was starting my own kind of journey properly in recovery. And around summer 2015, I'd really liked at that point reading people's stories online, but they were scattered everywhere on forums, and they were also often weren't recovery focused. They were very much suffering focused, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I weren't finding any recovery stories. So I basically created a website, a one-stop shop, as I think I originally thought of it, where people could share their stories. And I did written stories for a couple of years. After a few months, I started the podcast. I'd done a podcast previously around marketing ethics, which you can't, it's not online anymore, so you can't find it. Don't look for it. But that's where I learned the skill, so it was easy for me to then start it around the OCD. But I just remember sitting on the edge of my bed, really down, I'm not going to say depressed, but really down, really hopeless, and just remember thinking, right, well, if I'm going to suffer, if my life's going to be rubbish or trash, then people might as well get something from it. And then that's where the podcast, and then I started thinking of ideas, and that's how it really came about.
How did people respond when first here's someone reaching out to them and asking them to come on and tell their stories?
Really good. That's testament to the OCD community and the therapists in the community. They weren't like, oh, you've just started, or it's tiny, or Steve Hayes, he's obviously really well known. Episode 4, I think I had him on, 2 or 4, one of those, but very early on, and he didn't bat an eyelid. He just came on, and it was great, and he was really kind, and everyone I got on was super nice, and usually if people have said no, it's usually just because they're super busy, but they've been really nice about it. And I think that's also a testament that the therapists like yourself, they just want to talk about OCD. It's fun for them. They're giving up an hour of their time, which is obviously tough within their work schedule, but they're obviously getting something out of it in terms of enjoying the conversation, hopefully.
And I don't know if anyone's asked you this, but what do you personally get out of it? What does it do for you to produce this and bring this to the masses every week?
Well, I mean, obviously, NOCD sponsor the podcast, so yeah, that helps, and that helps pay for my time. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to keep going it, to be honest, because I'd need to see more clients and all of that. But yeah, I enjoy the conversations like we're having now. It's nice to talk with others, whether that's a sufferer, whether that's a therapist, researcher, whatever. And yeah, so I guess that the community coming here to this conference, meeting people that listen to the podcast, hearing how it's helped them, is just incredibly moving and makes me continue it. As you know, doing the podcast and all the YouTube stuff you've done over the years, and books, and it's hard to do all that, right? But when you hear how it's affected someone, it's really motivating. So that's kind of what keeps me going, I guess. And I love learning, and I want to be the best therapist I can. And sometimes reading's hard for me, and that my attention span isn't that great. Whereas, getting you on the podcast, talking to you for an hour, I get a massive deep dive in a topic that really helps me. And the therapist I am today is largely because of all the interviews I've done with people like yourself.
Oh, thanks. And where do you want to see it evolve? What's your hope for it?
Do you know what? Someone asked me this. It was either last night, and I was like, I have no idea.
Okay.
It's literally, again, like I said earlier, one day at a time. It's for me. My intention of the podcast has always been getting great guests on, good stories, deep diving into ERP, constantly, talking to different therapists with different nuanced ways of doing ERP. And then also like things like ACT, compassion focused therapy, different therapies, just any of my curiosities, if any new therapy came up, I would probably talk about that. But yeah, just wherever my curiosity is at in 5 years is where the podcast is going to be at. I don't think I have any grand plans for it.
In terms of then personal life, you've got a child.
Yeah.
You've got the podcast, you've got OCD, you've got the work. Obviously, OCD loves a stressor.
Yes.
So bringing a kid in the world, stressor. Podcast, stressor. Work with clients, fun, but stressor,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Keep a marriage going, a house going, all these kinds of things. I think that people would be interested to hear from you. How do you manage a professional life and a day-to-day life and stay as sane as possible, right? I mean, how do you do it?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and I've definitely failed at times. And there was a point probably 4 years ago where I basically quit the podcast, as in I'm done. I made the decision in my head, and I felt a huge sense of relief. I was like, but then we talked about it, and I was like, I'm not done. I was done with certain things of the podcast, and I cut back those. So so just to say that's how far it's got for me. But that was only once. But I use my skills. I'm using ERP. I'm leaning into anything that's triggering me in an OCD way. I'm using dropping anchor from acceptance commitment therapy. If I'm feeling stressed, I do that between sessions sometimes, or mindful moments, or whatever it's called on the breath. Yeah, work on the phone watch. A lot of compassion if I'm being hard on myself. A lot of that. And then for me, it's scheduling in. I schedule my work in. And sometimes, obviously, that goes over and I'm working in the evenings or whatever, or the weekends. But generally, Saturday, I'm going to watch my local football team or soccer team. And I do that every other week when they're playing at home. I'm making sure I'm doing stuff with my daughter or whatever it is. It's if I don't block it in, it doesn't happen.
Okay.
So I'm a big fan of time blocking. And recently, I can't remember the name of the app, but it basically blocks Instagram, Facebook, Twitter,
Oh, really?
all of that. So I can't use it in certain times of the day. And my usage of my phone has plummeted massively.
I did an interview with someone else who said the same thing, that at 5 o'clock, he can't check his email because it is literally locked on his computer until Monday morning.
Yeah. I think I think there's some law in France where your boss isn't allowed to email you. I think evenings and weekends, or at least weekends, it's something like that, because they want to respect people's relaxation time.
You have interviewed, I'm thinking, over 500 people at this point?
Today was my 444th
Oh,
episode.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
So we'll say 450. Yeah. That's a lot of folks to probably gather themes. And I'm interested in what are some recurring things that you keep hearing from people with OCD and then from people who treat OCD?
With OCD community, how important that is, absolutely, and the opposite of that when they don't have it, how alone they can feel. Trauma's become more relevant recently. More and more people seem to be talking about that and how that feeds into the OCD. And then with clinicians, what are the common ones there? It really just depends on the modality they're doing. But with ERP, it's very much like the sort of willingness to do it, how motivated they are, and in ACT you talk about willingness, and that's a big part of doing ERP, of trying to increase people's willingness. In terms of, I think those are probably the big ones, and compassion. Actually, the last couple of years, compassion's come up a ton. Whether that's like the UK sort of compassion-focused therapy or the mindful self-compassion, like Kristen Neff and people in the US. That seems to be a growing trend. And then themes just go across the board. It really just depends. I try and, when I pick stories, people's stories, I try and base, I haven't had, say, sexual orientation OCD for a while.
Okay.
Or it's sexual orientation OCD from someone who is homosexual and they're deeply worried about being straight. So I've never had that, for example. So, okay, let's invite them on. So I try and get a real variance.
So really, even to spread the news, the multiple ways that these subtypes can occur, something like that.
Yeah,
right?
So I'm not good at knowing like the trends necessarily, because I'm just picking based on what I feel we haven't discussed on the podcast, as opposed to noticing what's coming in a lot. But I'm sure there's themes, maybe like gender identity OCD, I'm sure has become not popular, triggering more.
Common trigger,
Common, not popular.
Yeah.
It's not like they chose it.
right. Yeah. I'm struck by you saying that here we are in Orlando. This is where you were the first time OCD popped up.
Yeah.
Is it weird to be back here at all?
Yeah.
And did you think about that coming back over? Or because again, I know people are watching going, I'd rather always avoid the place where it started or something, and here you are right in the place. And so how is that?
Yeah, well, when I saw whenever it was, I mean, we booked our flights in January this year, so I must have seen last year that it was here. So ever since that time, it was on my mind. I'm going back, like, what's that going to be like? And I was thinking about it. Is it going to trigger me again? I was worried about that. It hasn't. I feel completely. The other one I used to have when I was 7 was sharks in the swimming pool, you know, and I was in the swimming pool yesterday, completely at peace. Not what I had one intrusive thought, and I just dealt with it. But it hasn't bothered me at all, and that's really awesome to see the progress and how the skills have helped me and how the therapy's paid off, thankfully. And so it's really nice to be in this position and be back. It's been real awesome.
You have a fame to yourself now, right? You come to this conference, people know who you are.
Nowhere else.
Nowhere else. I always say I still cut my own grass, right? But here people know me. My neighbors don't care, right?
Exactly,
But what do people come up and say, and what do they talk about, and what do they want to know from you about all the work you've done? Yeah,
well, the therapists are usually flattering, like maybe it's helped them learn something, or it just keeps them engaged in the community. And then the people with OCD, I've had people say it basically stopped them from suicide, which is
amazing.
A weird thing to hear, because I don't think I can't really process that. But it's amazing to hear. And just I think the common one though is it helped them feel less alone. It was the first time they felt seen, or often it was the first time they realized they needed ERP. And obviously I get emails, I found OCD because of your podcast and stuff like that. So all of that's really nice to hear, that they may have suffered for 30 years and had many therapists before they got evidence-based treatment. So that's a real nice one, I think, for me, is that they got the help they needed.
Since you were so young when this started, and I'm assuming you go back, how do you start treatment, and how do you find the right treatment?
Wow. mean, I didn't for the longest time.
Yeah.
You know, I say used to be because I don't really hear this term anymore, but it used to be called the secret illness, right?
Yeah.
You've heard that?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't hear that anymore.
Right.
Is it lexicon? Is that
Yeah,
what,
yeah.
Zeitgeist or whatever. And but for me, that was very much the truth. Maybe because my view of mental health was a straitjacket growing up. I thought if I told my parents anything, I'm going to be taken away, locked up. I won't see them again. As a young kid, that's deeply terrifying. So I kept my mouth shut and did all my compulsions in secret. And occasionally, someone saw something, and they said, "Oh, that's a bit quirky what you just did," and I kind of laughed it off as if I was playing or whatever. My parents knew I was an anxious kid. They didn't really know why. They didn't see any compulsions. Obviously, they would have seen me ruminating, but they wouldn't have known what that was. Or so I mean, when I was 17, I went to the National Health Service in the UK, the NHS.
Yep.
Saw a psychiatrist, psychologist over 2 various trips. Basically put it down, because I later asked for my notes about 10 years later. They put down basically mild OCD ? But no Y box was done, no OCI, I think it's OCI, none of that. They weren't OCD specialists. And I now know even mild OCD is deeply terrorizing. So I basically went away, suffered for another nearly 10 years. It waxed and waned. It actually got better at university and then got dramatically worse again. 27, luckily I had enough money at that point to go private. And I was like, something has to be done again, because I was at some kind of crisis point. And that was it really. Then got therapy. And then after sort of ACT, ERP-based therapy, I then went into more relational therapy for quite a few years to work on sort of non-OCD stuff, which was really helpful for me as well.
Mm-hmm. That's probably really interesting then to take a look at, because OCD doesn't travel by itself, right?
Yeah.
It usually has some co-occurring anxiety or depression.
Yeah.
How have you brought all of that work into your own recovery?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of relational therapist I saw, I was at that point I knew talk therapy doesn't help OCD. So I was like, although I was pretty much in recovery, I was like, I'm still not going to bring any of my themes to her, because I don't want to get reassured constantly and all of that. So I was just working on sort of family stuff like that. But that was hugely helpful for me to process that and be in a therapeutic relationship for a longer period of time. And for me, that was incredibly healing as well. And I try and do that now when I'm doing directive therapies like ERP and ACT and compassion. I'm also still got in the back of mind, like Cole Rogers, the core conditions, all of that. Like, am I putting this across? And as long as we're not talking too much to avoid doing the ERP work, I will occasionally, especially with teens, there's a lot that needs to be talked about, just as long as we're not getting sidetracked.
Yeah.
Or if we've done a lot of the directive work and the OCD is a much better place, then we can spend much more time in session doing that stuff.
I agree. I couldn't agree more with that you have to watch out for crisis of the week therapy, but you have to make room for a crisis as well.
100%,
Yeah. How do you manage your own crises now? Because not only will, I'm assuming, the kid falls once in a while or something, or you go to get the podcast and the Zoom link's not working or something like that. And again, since OCD loves a stressor, it'll jump on those. What do you do to keep yourself from, doing a compulsion at that point in time?
Well, I think for me, what I realized, I had a bit of a relapse about 4 years ago now. And I'd been good for about 5 years, and then it kind of hit me out of the blue. I didn't realize it was more panic than OCD, but I didn't realize to call it anxiety. I didn't realize it was anxiety. I thought I was generally, about to pass out and stuff like that. In session, I was getting super anxious. Yeah. And my clients obviously hopefully didn't realize that. Yeah. But I was at a 9 sometimes when we were doing ERP, and they were at a 7. And and I want to run out the room and go cry somewhere. But I didn't. I stuck with it and used all my skills. And I got better from that, luckily. Well, not luckily, it was the skills. And there's no luck in it. But what I realized in that was I'd stopped exercising. I had all these life stressors going on. My daughter was very young. Being a therapist is tough sometimes. So I started exercising a lot again. I say a lot, not like compulsively or negatively, but enough. And staying on top of my exercise really helps me with stress, like managing that. And then it's just using my skills, like I said earlier, with the ACT, mindful minutes, breath work. That all that stuff really helps. And then keeping a good sense of humor. I think, you know, I watch comedies. I'll joke with all my clients if it's appropriate.
Yeah.
And whoever, I'm always trying to have fun, because if I'm not, life's too hard at times to not joke.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I too love a little bit of humor.
I know you do, yeah.
And maybe you've seen that in our interviews, yeah. But I've always said, I'm going to be really nice to you, but I'm not going to be very nice to your OCD.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
And
like
trying to get that message across to people, and maybe to use a phrase from you, like take the Mickey out of it or something like that, right? You know, OCD doesn't deserve any compliments by any means.
Yeah, I like that phrase, yeah.
When you think about 25 years from now, right? You're such a young guy. You'll still be working, no doubt. But, but when you look at that, or maybe let me even change that.
Okay.
Let's say in 25 years from now, the conference is awarding you the Career Achievement Award for all this great work you've done, for breaking barriers, for bringing things up to people in a way that no one else did. I mean, you broke ground in so many ways, and you know, huge props to you for what you've done. So that's already happened. You've got 25 years to go. You're getting that award. What are the highlights going to be, do you think, that they're going to say, here's what Stuart Ralph did?
Yeah, well, that would be really nice if that happened. I think all I would want to be acknowledged for is that I just cared. That's it. Not to sound cheesy, but with my clients, I obviously want to help them get their lives back and all of this. But even if I fail at that, if they come away just thinking, well, he cared. He saw me. He saw my pain. He cared. That's the most important thing to me, and that's what I try and have with the podcast. You know, it's I care, and that's what I want to be remembered for, as opposed to maybe I was this exceptional therapist, and that'd be awesome. I want to be that, but that's secondary for me. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, keep it simple there, I think, because I don't want to get, also in 25 years, I don't want to get bittered and sour and have lost that compassion. I think no matter how much I had achieved, that I would be a failure at that point if I had lost that in my mind.
You always ask people at the end something about a billboard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I remember you asking me that the first time. So now I'm wondering, what does your billboard say?
The only thing that's coming to my head, and it's super, super cheesy, is the word love, and I have no other, because I'm not a hippie, but I have no other sentences coming to my mind, but that word is there. And I think when I do therapy, one of my lecturers once said to me at uni, we can dance around it, but ultimately what we're doing is loving on our clients in a very boundaried way. You know, yeah. Therapy is an act of love and service, and I think maybe as humans we need to do that a bit more for each other, and care less about political orientation or gender or sexual orientation or even religious, you know, and just have a bit more fun and just accept where people are at.
On the flip side of that, how does OCD affect the ability to love?
What's coming up in my head, well, in terms of sex for people with OCD, it very much gets in the way of sexual relations, and that sound like Bill Clinton, and that obviously can be really tough, because that can be a foundational pillar for many people within relationships. Yeah, I don't know. You stumped me there a bit. I think just overthinking, rumination, massively gets in the way of all kinds of love, whether that's friendship love, romantic love, parental love.
Yeah.
And very much, you know, I work with parents and kids, and unfortunately causes massive problems in the home and can
Yeah.
really, for a short time at least, and maybe for some families long time, but most of the time short time, really big rifts that really separate them, and that's really sad. So I think that's maybe how it gets in the way of love.
Has OCD interfered before in your ability to love, even yourself? That might, and
Yeah.
let me go to that
Yeah.
exclusively,
Okay.
barring the other relations that you've had.
Yeah.
How has OCD affected your view of yourself, your relationship with yourself over time?
Hugely, hugely. I mean, OCD and other factors that I won't share in my life, but OCD 100% one of the main factors. I didn't like myself. You know, I'd won hadn't quite won the Hero Award in 2018, but a few months before that, I remember being in front. I'd just done the first OCD camp, which was like one of the biggest achievements of my life. I love doing the camp. It's so much fun. It's so impactful and meaningful being with those people for that period of time. And I came away like just completely detached from what I had done. And I remember telling my therapist and something else that had happened, that someone had kind of put me down, and the kind of look on her eyes when I was sharing it, of like, I could see the hurt in her eyes, and that really helped me connect. I was detached from how I was feeling and how critical I was being of myself. And we talked about it, and I managed that set. I said, you know, actually I'm proud of myself and what I've done. And that took a good 2-3 years of therapy to get to that point of actually, I'm proud of myself. And that's been an ongoing journey since then. And I learned compassion-focused therapy, and I'm always using that inner critic voice, or OCD. They're both very similar. When it's there, I try and bring up, so maybe I mess up and I'm such an idiot, and it's like, no, I'm human. Mm-hmm. And that's my go-to, is I'm human. And guess what? I'm gonna mess up again in the future, and that's okay, you know.
And for those who have OCD watching, is it okay to love yourself?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, no, why am I saying I think so? Yes, it's 100% okay. I don't know why I hesitate there. I think it's caveat of, I think if you've got trauma and stuff like that, and maybe you've had an extremely abusive past, I think it's incredibly hard to love yourself. Not hard, it feels incredibly hard. But I think with practice and the skills and a very compassionate therapist or compassionate people around you, you can learn to change that dialogue in your head. Some people it's going to be quicker, others it's going to take more persistence, but you can chip away at that voice that's being a douchebag in your head. Yeah.
I've always said this, that OCD removes your ability to laugh and enjoy and have fun, but maybe I'll amend that too. It can even take away your ability to love yourself.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, and look, parents on average don't, as far as I'm aware, don't teach us how to love ourselves, and that's because they were never taught how to do it.
Right.
Schools didn't teach them. The teachers don't know because their teachers, their lecturers didn't teach them. The government doesn't teach us. That's for sure, and that's my government, and I'm sure as well as yours. No one's taught us. So it's not to blame anyone, but it's, you know, anyone hearing this, let's change that. Let's start, and it starts with us. And maybe if that's hard to start with us, we start by building other people up around us, because sometimes we can be compassionate to others, we can't be it to ourselves. But maybe that's where we start. We build others up, and then ultimately, hopefully, if they're decent people around us, they're going to return the favor and build us up too. And then eventually, maybe we'll be able to do it for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I can say, knowing the OCD community, you are loved.
Thank you.
By so many people who, I think, you have opened the door for folks who didn't know what they had. And when people have talked about community and looked for a voice, your podcast was sometimes the first thing that they ever heard, and that they learned that there's people out there like them. So on behalf of the community, thank you for what you've done.
Yeah,
appreciate it very much.
I appreciate you too.
All right. And thank you all for watching the Get to Know OCD podcast with Stuart Ralph today. And if you're interested in information about OCD, go to NOCD.com. And if you want to watch more of the Get to Know OCD podcast, subscribe to the NOCD YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.